Hey everyone, welcome to chapter 1 in general biology. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about characteristics associated with all living things. So what is biology? Biology is the study of life. And where does life exist? Well, it exists pretty much everywhere. Not all humans or all animals can exist everywhere, but living things can exist almost everywhere, including hydrothermal vents under the ocean, volcanoes, and polar ice caps. So, places where we may not exist, there are living things that can still exist there. Earth possesses a great variety of life, and all life, bacterial, cells, all the way up to humans, have certain characteristics that are similar. So let's look at some of these. And so this is just a figure showing lots of different life forms. So we've got our bacteria up here. We've got our protozoans. We've got plants, fungi, and animals, both human and non-human animals. So let's see some of those characteristics that bring us all together. All living things are composed of cells. Cells are organized. Life is organized. Cells form organized structures called tissues. So if you're multicellular, you have multiple cells that form tissues, and those tissues forms organs, and organs form organ systems, and then you got all these different multicellular organisms. All living things need energy. All living things have to be able to reproduce. All living things respond to different stimuli. All living things have to be able to maintain homeostasis. And all living things need to be able to adapt. So let's look at these a little closer. Here we have a cell. Right here is the cell. So anything smaller than a cell is not considered living. So molecules, atoms, they are not living. But cells are the smallest unit that are considered living. And so we have animal cells, nerve cells, we have plant cells. Bacteria are single-celled organisms. So that's all they are. They are a cell, and they reproduce. So like I said, cells then come together forming tissues, which form organs, which form organ systems, and organisms. Organisms then of the same type are considered a species. When they all live together, they're in a population. Populations of different species come together, forming communities, and the community with the environment, so living and non-living environment, forms the ecosystem. And all the ecosystems on Earth form our biosphere. We need energy. And so the energy that our cells use is called ATP. But we don't eat or take in ATP. We take in materials that allow us to produce ATP. So we take in nutrients. Here is a bird feeding her young. That's an example of gaining energy. So eating is how we gain energy. We take in carbohydrates, we take in proteins, and we break them down and we produce energy. And energy is what we use to do different work. The energy that our cells use, like I said, is ATP. We have to be able to reproduce. So reproduction is the production of new cells or new organisms. And so in this case, we're looking at sexual reproduction, where we have two sex cells, the sperm and the egg, right there, coming together, forming a eventually a new organism. So the first structure is called a zygote. And that zygote multiplies asexually via mitosis. And the cells specialize and these specialized cells then start forming different structures, and eventually we get that fetus that we see there. Okay, and so that's reproduction. So we have sexual reproduction is known as meiosis in animals and plants, and asexual reproduction is mitosis. Okay, for bacteria, they only asexually reproduce, and so their reproduction is called binary fission. So they're only going to reproduce asexually, producing new identical copies of themselves via binary fission. During reproduction, genes are passed from the parent cell to the offspring. This is during asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction. We have genes. Genes are found in our DNA. They are coded for in the DNA, and they are passed on from parent to offspring. There we go. All living things have to be able to respond to stimuli. So a stimulus is something that our cells react to. And so it can be a positive stimulus or a negative stimulus. In this case of this man here, it's obviously pain from a hot cup of coffee. And so he's going to respond by setting it down, dropping it, whatever, so that he doesn't burn himself or have a serious burn. So stimuli allow organisms to survive in the environment. If it's a beneficial stimulus, then they're going to move towards that stimulus. If it's a detrimental stimulus, they're going to move away from it. All living things have to be able to maintain relatively consistent internal stimuli. And so this is termed homeostasis, or staying the same. And all living things have to do this. In humans, you can see the homeostatic mechanism when you sweat. So if your body temperature starts to increase, that's dangerous. And so what your body does in response is it's going to send signals to your skin, to the sweat glands in the skin, and tell those sweat glands to release sweat. And that sweat, as it evaporates off the surface of the skin, when the skin is so hot, it takes with it that heat, and that cools our body down. So when we talk about homeostasis, we're looking at balance. And so that's what this picture is showing. Here we have we are maintaining balance. Anything that is throwing us out of homeostasis is dangerous. So you can be hypo or hyper, and that's dangerous. So think about, you've probably heard of hypoglycemia is low blood sugar, and hyperglycemia is high blood sugar. Both are dangerous. We want to have blood sugar be maintained. And so that's an example of a homeostatic mechanism as well, blood sugar levels. We have to be able to adapt. So all living things have to be able to adapt to their surroundings. And I love this figure of your pepper moths. So these moths have adapted. So if you look at this picture here, there's a pepper moth right there. there's also one right there. The one that you can see better is this dark one, right? Over here, we have a pepper moth right here, and we have a pepper moth right here. The one that you can see better is this one. So as the environment changed and soot was laid down during the Industrial Revolution, trees got covered in that soot, and different types of these moths were more likely to be seen and picked off by birds. And so they evolved from one color. So this was a more common color initially right here because they were protected. They evolved to that lighter color. So that's a microevolution. You're seeing that evolution, and it's an adaptation. So adaptation, basically, organisms that are better adapted to the environment are going to be able to survive and reproduce. And so we went from more common dark moths to more common light moths because of the environment. And this leads us to this process called natural selection. Natural selection is the ability to be better adapted. So if you're better adapted to the environment, you're more likely to be able to reproduce, and your genes will be the more common genes in the environment. Natural selection leads to evolution. Evolution is the change in frequency of traits within a population and a species. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll get into classification in our next video. You guys have a great day. Bye.